one of the greatest disservice that colonization did to Africans, particularly Kenya, because I'm speaking in the context of my country, is the elimination of our history before colonialism. Because what most of us have is history during the colonial times and after, during and post-colonial, but there is very little history on what really happened, or what really looked like, or what our ancestors really did before colonialism. And I think part of maybe you can say the education system is to blame, but then really if you look at it, the education system was still curated. We are learning in the white man's system, so there's not really much that we can do about that right now. But if you look at it, for instance, when we were in primary school, we were taught about, mostly the history was about during colonialism, the struggle for independence, and afterwards. And even that, most of the things were just cherry-picked, like you'll just get a highlight of what Kenya looked like, or what our ancestors did, or what the struggle for independence was like, because a lot of it maybe was just about talking about the collaborators, resistors, the Mau Mau movement, and things like those. But you see, there is really a lot of history that is really missing, that you're trying to figure out what really happened. That makes you want to wonder what really happened before the white man came. Because if you look at it, even if you look at, let's say we take a case of during the struggle for independence, the Mau Mau movement. When you look at what you were taught in schools, mostly the Mau Mau movement is thought to have been in the central region of Kenya, and mostly, let's say, led by the Kikuyu community and all that. But then you take a deep dive into the research of the Kenyan history, and you realize that Mau was not only, okay, a lot of people were Kikuyus, but there were also other communities who were in the movement. They were Luos, there were Luyas, there were Maasais, the Ma community was there. So that part of history, it's not highlighted. Then you come to what really happened to Kenyans during the colonial times. There's a lot of brutality that went on. In fact, there was some research that I was doing, and it said that sometimes, like what happened to Kenya during the colonial times can be linked sort of to what's happened to the Jews during the Nazi movement. I don't know much about that, but that also highlights the reason why a lot of history was eliminated, and we really don't know what happened. But then if we go back to what really happened before the colonialists came back, like before the colonialists came to Kenya, there's really nothing much to talk about. There is nothing, we cannot know, like we barely know what our people did, how they ate, how they dressed, what their way of life was like, what their religion was like. We don't know much about that. We just have nitty-gritty, like we can just have an idea of it, but really having like some deep information about what we were before, there's really not much about that. And someone was saying, I think I was watching a certain documentary which was saying, like we were colonized by the British people, the Kenyans. So just as the colonizers did in other parts of Africa, when they came and they found some form of learning or something, some form of evidence to showcase that people were learning, they'll ban, for instance, the books and everything, they'll ban the records, they'll ban the evidence, and they'll introduce their own systems of learning. So it is said that a lot of the British people, Kenyan history, what Kenya really looked like before is actually being held by the British people, or it's known by the British people. We cannot prove that, we don't know about that. But it also makes you wonder, like, how was life like? What was really happening before the white man came? Yeah? And this also makes you question a lot of things, because, for instance, right now you're like, for systems to work, for instance, for things to be okay in a country or in a society, it has to be in sync with the culture and the way of life and the way those people live. So sometimes you're wondering, is this dysfunction that you are experiencing, is it as a result of us not being in sync with who we really are, because we cannot really know who we are, we cannot really know what really we cannot know what really works for us and what does not work for us, because we are using the white man system right now. So yeah, I know it's a wide topic to discuss, because there is a lot of learning and unlearning to do, but that is the fact. We don't know a lot of what happened to Kenya pre-colonial, and even those that exist, you find like someone has written a book about the Kenyan pre-colonial era, and the person is a white person, the author is a white person. So you're like, are you really telling me this story from the perspective, from your own perspective, or from the perspective of an African who has had a lived-in experience? So, yeah, we're left wondering, what was Kenya really like? How are people living? How are our ancestors ruling? What were the systems that were in place that existed before? Because they used to work. I like to believe they used to work, at least before the white man came. So you're left wondering about all those questions, and I think that is the big question that Kenyans really have to do, to dig deeper, to find what was it, how was it like, what were we doing, what was the systems that are, what were the systems that are working, so that at least maybe we can implement some of them, because right now there we are headed in this capitalistic society. It looks like systems are not really working, so